Hello and welcome to the EdTech Podcast. My name is Rose Luckin and I'm your host. The integration of artificial intelligence into classrooms across the nation is rapidly becoming a reality, although progress is uneven and not everyone is yet involved. While some schools have jumped at the opportunity to utilise AI for grading, personalised learning plans and more, other institutions remain hesitant. But one thing is abundantly clear. AI is here to stay, and AI is not without risks. And today I'm joined by my wonderful guests, Emma Darcy, Director of Technology for Learning at Denbigh High School, and Sarah Buist, Head of Digital Strategy at Royal Grammar School, Newcastle. So welcome to our pod studio. It's great to have you here. I'm really keen to hear from you about what you're doing with artificial intelligence, how it's working in your schools, and to hear a little bit about your roles. So to start off, can each of you give us a sense of how widely AI is being adopted at your respective institutions and your particular area of focus? So tell us a little bit about what's actually happening. Emma, do you want to kick us off on this one, please?
No problem. So I'm Emma Darcy. I'm Director of Technology for Learning at Denbigh High School in Luton. I've been there for the past 11 years. I have quite a few multiple roles at the moment. So I also work as a trustee for Apps for Good. I'm a work stream lead for AI in education as well. And I'm also part of a group called the Digital Futures Group, which is supporting schools and maths with digital strategy. And I think in terms of where we're at with AI at Denbigh, probably about 18 months ago with the advent of ChatGPT, that was the point where we kind of realised that something was coming that was probably going to be very significant in terms of education, in terms of what was happening in school, in terms of things that we needed to be aware of. And I try and avoid using cliches like game changer and things like that, because I know they're very overused at the moment. But it was one of those things where I was very lucky. I'm part of a really supportive leadership team where we can have these conversations about what's coming down the track. And it really was something where we were like, right, we need to start having conversations about this. We need to start talking about what the likely challenges of AI are going to be. We need to start thinking about how can we fit this into our school improvement plan for the year, which we did do. And how can we be one of those schools that, rather than stepping back from this, faces it head on, goes, yes, we know this is going to be challenging, we know this is going to be difficult, but let's really try and own this. So we've when I say we've adopted it widely, what I mean is I wouldn't say that, you know, we're using every AI tool going in the classroom and that sort of thing at all. But what we've done is we've developed a set of sort of guardrails, policies and procedures for how we're approaching AI and how we're approaching the development of AI in school. So like I said, I've already mentioned things like the school improvement plan, embedding it in that. We've also set up a steering group, both a staff steering group and a student steering group as well. And we were very lucky, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, that we'd already introduced the idea of a period 6 curriculum to look at digital skills within the school. The timing was perfect then in terms of going, actually, AI fits really nicely into that, because as well as having conversations about what our staff needed to know and what we needed to be thinking about as a leadership team, we also had those conversations about what do we really need to be aware of for our students, and not just, are they going to use it to cheat? Because of course they are, because I would have done if I'd had that as an option as well. So we just really sort of started having those sorts of conversations, putting some things in place, and everything that we're doing now has kind of led on from that.
That sounds most impressive. And I love the sort of guardrails, policy, procedures, school improvement plan. It's really organised and integrated into who you are as a school. What does that mean for a teacher in a classroom in terms of how they engage with AI?
What it means for a teacher in a classroom, that for starters, is this is not something to be afraid of. This is not something where we're going to leave you in the dark about it. This is something where actually we are going to keep you updated as a school about how we are approaching this, and we are going to let you know what's coming. So one of the things that we did very early on, to be honest, was do some very simple, short training sessions for staff, just to update them really about what AI was. You know, just to say this is why AI is different now from a few years ago. This is the new features that are now inherent in AI that you're going to need to be aware of, because they have the potential to support you in your role and with workload reduction. But also, if you're aware of them, you know full well our students are going to be aware of them, and we're going to have to start developing these skills for supporting the children with their use of this. And we're also, as a school, we're not a school that sort of says, right, and as I mentioned earlier, we're going to adopt every single tool going. But what we are going to do is give you some guidance to use a few tools really well, but they will be linked to our teaching and learning policy and the way we address teaching in the classroom. So we're not, in the same way that we don't treat technology as a bolt-on, we're not going to treat AI as a bolt-on, because it's part of our overall strategy. So as a teacher, you have a very, very clear understanding of what AI is, of how it's going to support you, of the fact that there are things that we are going to be introducing that we maybe haven't yet. And if you've got queries about it, or you've got a tool that you'd like us to consider using, or you've got questions, you know exactly where to go to get the answers for that. But it's not a taboo subject. And to begin with, one of the things when I said to teachers, right, so who's had a go at using AI, all these guilty hands would go up as if it was something to be really embarrassed about. And so, to be honest, that was one of the first things we did, was say, no, this is not a naughty secret. This is something we're going to be talking about, and we're going to continue to talk about over the coming year.
I think that's so sensible. I think it's really important that you don't have it as a taboo subject. You need to know. It's a bit like phishing emails. You don't want people not to tell you when they've opened the attachment that they shouldn't have attached. You want them to tell you, because you need to know, and you need to know who's using AI. And I think you're absolutely right. To take a very focused approach. It's not about how many tools you can use, is it? It's about how you actually use them to have impact. So just before I move on to Sarah, can you give us a sort of specific example of an AI tool that you're finding really useful?
So an example of an AI tool that we're finding really useful at the moment would be something like Canva. And what I love about Canva is the fact that we haven't started to introduce it in school because it's got AI. We've introduced it in school because it's an incredible design tool. We've got learners who, come from a range of different backgrounds, have a range of access to technology at home. Some have got very limited access. And what we try and do in general is give them access to device agnostic tools that are free of charge, that they can access both in school and at home, and that allow them to do really creative things and engage with their learning in a different way. So the fact that Canva has AI within it is just an additional feature that has been really, really positive to start using and to start engaging with, because obviously we can teach the children about things like image generation using AI, but in a very specific way that is linked to a very clear learning objective, as opposed to just going, oh, isn't this cool? Isn't this amazing? We can actually link it to something that they're specifically having to do. And to be honest, that's some of my favorite tools at the moment, are those ones where they are really clearly linked to a learning outcome, so that you're not just teaching about the AI, you're teaching about the tool in general and what it can do. And again, one of the things we've done is we've done a whole school adoption of this through our Enrichment Week programme, that also involves training all the teachers on how to use it as well, because there's no point, obviously, with the students knowing how to use it if the teachers don't know how to use it. So the idea is that every member of staff in school learns how to use this as a tool, and all the students learn at the same time, so that, again, when everyone comes back in September, it's another tool in the toolkit that the students know how to use to support their learning.
It makes absolute sense. It's a great tool, isn't it? Yeah. And I think that piece about training is really important. I'm going to pick up on that in just a moment. But thank you, Emma. Before that, I want to go to Sarah for an intro and a bit about what's going on in your school using AI.
Hi, yes, no problem. So I'm Sarah Buist. I'm Head of Digital Strategy at the Royal Grammar School in Newcastle. And like Emma, I have a very varied role, but half of my role is very much taken up about the adoption of technology to support the learning and the teaching going on in the classroom. And I suppose it's very interesting to hear Emma's story, because it's actually very similar in that we kind of 18 months ago, when the generative area of AI became available to everyone, I think we did take in a bit of a sharp draw of breath and went, okay. And I'm really lucky. I have got a group of digital leaders and some really sort of enthusiastic deputy heads and leadership team as well. And we all sat down and said, right, what's the best course of action? We did some basic training similar to what Emma was talking about what AI is to all staff at the end of the last academic year. And then by September, we had put in place very sort of general but fairly sort of pinpointed policies for our students to actually sign at the beginning of the year to say, you're not going to misuse it, or, we're going to be finding out a bit about it. And so basically getting them straight away at the beginning of the academic year that we know about this. We know you've probably been engaging with it over the summer, and we'd like you to agree that we're going to all abide by these sort of rules. And so in the first half term, I then sort of led assemblies to students about what the basics of AI is, and our general approach to what we think the guide rail should be, like why it's so important that you still need to learn. It can't be a shortcut to learning. It's never been more important to know information and be able to stand back about and look at perhaps how information generated can be biased. It can have so quite a cautious approach, I would probably say. We then, by sort of the end of the sort of Christmas term, had in place quite, I hope, good guidelines of how staff should be using it appropriately, because that was a worry as well, that potentially, unknowingly staff were putting student data into programs that we didn't want them to. So we felt that we really did need to draw some lines in the sand over that. It sounds like I'm being incredibly cautious, but I think we were, if you're not cautious, but we're also quite enthusiastic, but we also wanted to see what the opportunities were. Some of my digital leaders, what one of their tasks to do last year was to actually run programs where they use a tech intervention based on some student sort of needs or learning needs within their own departments. So we had a couple of digital leaders actually use some AI products over the past year to actually trial them and look at the impact that they've had. And what's been really pleasing is by the end of this year, rather than it's being specifically AI focused, we've actually done a whole school ed tech mapping survey to find out how technology is being used in relation to our 12 principles of excellent teaching and learning. So rather than it being a thing on its own, it's just another tool, like Emma was saying, and trying to identify from that who's perhaps using AI, but alongside other tools as well. So it's our first step really to try and find out how it's being used. And the results have been really varied, and I've been quite surprised. I've had nearly 100% sort of return, which is good for a staff survey at the end of the summer term, by the variety of our staff, and some real surprises of who've actually dipped their toes in and used some of our guidance, some of the help, and using it in amazing ways to support adaptive practice, for example, like adapting for our huge range of SEND students that we have at school, and really practical ways to reduce that workload as well. Our leadership team are using it to create interview questions and interview tasks to try and reduce the amount of workload there, which is really interesting. One of our support staff were using the Magic School AI app to produce stories for individual students that they support who are really anxious about going away on a year 7 residential camp only 2 weeks ago. And she said, oh yeah, so the way that I sort of support the students, I make up stories to try and illustrate that this might happen. So there might be a scenario, but within the story, this is how this student managed to cope with going away from home, perhaps missing their routines and things like that. And she found that the AI, generative AI tool in Magic School was actually really useful at producing the story for her really quickly. And she just went through and changed the details and made it personalized to that particular student. So over the course of the year, we've put in at the beginning quite sort of, I hope, cautious boundaries for people to work with. And by the end of the year, we kind of bookmarked that with a survey to see how people were using it, but not just AI in particular, but how it supported what we've developed to be our 12 principles of excellent teaching and learning. And as I say, it's been really interesting to see the results of that. But yes, so that's kind of where we're at the moment. And hopefully we're going to be focusing more on AI specifically next year. That's our plan. We've kind of eased people into it. And our main focus is bringing in parents, because I feel that we've done quite a bit for staff. We've sort of done stuff for students, but parents, we've kind of put out one kind of statement at the beginning of the year going, this is our approach. This is what we're doing in school. And that's kind of it. So we're really wanting to involve our parents in this as well, because I know we'll get onto it later, but the well-being and the issues of using AI on their own personal devices and things like that is something that we're really seeing the effects of, but want to make sure that our parents are on the same page as us.
Absolutely. I love the fact that you've sort of started off with this planning and done a survey, so you bookended it, which is brilliant. And getting 100% survey response, that's just amazing. I think that's brilliant. I think cautious enthusiasm sounds absolutely perfect. And yeah, I'd love to hear a couple of examples of the sort of specific, you talked about Magic School, but maybe a couple of other examples of how the AI is helping you to achieve something that's really valuable.
Well, I think what's interesting is the year 9s computing students. So one of our digital leads is a computing teacher, and she was really interested to see whether or not our students could use it as an aid, as like an assistant, a really productive assistant. It can do all the donkey work and allow the students to really grow. And so she did 2 kind of studies, one with her A-level group who were looking at a pre-release paper that they had, oh gosh, it must have been around about January time now, for their mock, and the year 9 pupils to decode, to debug some coding that they'd done. And the results were completely different. So the year sort of 13s, they got their pre-release paper and they used a whole variety of chatbots. So from ChatGPT to Claude, all the different types. They said, free reign, go and have a look and see if you can use it as an assistant to help research the puzzle that you've got to solve and write some code for. I then sat in the feedback session that they presented at. And what was really interesting was that the most able of students found the right way, perhaps the right way, I'll say in inverted commas, you can't see that I'm doing that, but the right way to use the chatbot to kind of accelerate their research. And one of them said, it was unreal. I got chat to just check and actually go further with the Python code and to test it. And I would have never have sat down and done all of that myself, but it meant that I could rule out lots of different avenues. And then it really focused me on what potentially could be my next avenue to explore what was, I didn't even get my head around it. I'm a geography teacher by background, so a lot of it was lost, but I thought that was really interesting. And he was a very able pupil, is expected to get some of the top marks. And you just think, yeah, you're going to you've flown with that. What was interesting was the students who perhaps were not as able, and this was not discussed obviously in front of them, but they found it, there's a lot of work to get this chatbot to do what I want it to do. It keeps giving me stuff I don't think that's right, and I'm not sure and so they found it actually more confusing. And then further down with the year 9s, when they were using it for a similar style task, and it was quite structured, the year 9s, they also found that unless they had quite a bit of input and direction with their prompts to the chat bot, they actually found it quite hard work to use it to debug because of the inaccuracies sometimes of what was generated and so on. So that's quite specific for computing and coding and so on, but it's an interesting kind of sort of comparison between 2 different age groups. And actually that helped some of our guidelines. Was basically we've kind of recommended that students under the age of 16 shouldn't really be using generative AI at the moment without very, very clear and close guidance. Whereas we feel that our sixth formers need to be exposed to it and need to have opportunities to explore what it can do for them, if that makes sense. And if it really can accelerate their learning, if it really can improve their abilities and open opportunities that they hadn't thought of before, and be that amazing little assistant that does a lot of the grunt work, which means that they can look at other opportunities, if that makes sense.
It's a great example. And I think seeing the AI as an assistant is a really good way of looking at it. But I think there are challenges there too, because you need to know what that assistant is capable of doing. And that, I think, is a challenge for a lot of people, because not everybody, I guess, is as lucky as the teachers in your school and Emma's school. In the national benchmarking study that we've been conducting of the responses we've had so far, 62% of respondents said that they had leadership or a group that's dedicated to coordinating the use of AI. And I think we need to contextualize that in the fact that probably most of the people responding to the benchmarking survey are at least AI aware, because they're aware of the self-evaluation survey. But actually, only 32% of respondents were in schools where there was any kind of CPD program, which is actually quite low. And as I say, when you bear in mind that our respondents are probably amongst the more AI aware, I think it makes it clear that not everybody's quite as fortunate as the teachers in your schools. And I'm just wondering, if we take that in context, and if we take into account the fact that even the people building these generative AI models don't actually know how they work, how confident can we be about the risks being mitigated in a way that we feel comfortable with? And how do you go about that? And what maybe there are other challenges that you're seeing, but I'm particularly interested in that safeguarding risk mitigation space. But feel free to bring in any other challenges that you're facing. Emma, over to you.
In terms of how the challenges, I think the biggest one that's out there really outside of education, but in general, and it was a quote of yours, Rose, that I actually picked up on LinkedIn, which was the one about the fact that it's business driving the development of AI, the fact it's not schools, it's not education. We're not in that situation where we're driving that. We're on board because we need to be on board with it and we need to keep pace with it, or at least some schools are. But that's the biggest challenge, is the drivers behind the scenes of this. And the fact that we have to be really aware of that as schools, is that what these, there are a lot of companies that are sort of, every product is, is now AI integrated and this sort of thing, because it's a wonderful sales tag, and don't get me wrong, there are some fantastic products out there, but it's difficult, I think, for schools and educators, for starters, to sort of see the wood for the trees almost, in terms of where where there are some really good solid products that they can engage with, and where the challenges are. I think the other thing in terms of challenges that we've seen is that, and again, I think you're right, in schools like we work in, where you've got people who get this and understand this and prioritize this, you can have those sorts of conversations and you can move things on really fast. Because of the pace of change with AI, everything is moving on so fast all the time. And if you're in a school where you haven't got that kind of leadership, and where you've got people who are wary of this or scared of this, there's a real challenge around people going, well, actually, we haven't got the capacity to engage with this now. We don't have the time, we don't have the skills, we don't have the expertise. And as a result, I've seen a real trend towards some schools and organizations almost wanting to treat AI like another technology fad. Oh, this is like interactive whiteboards. This is like handheld voting devices. If we, sit back for long enough, this is going to go away the same as those did. And of course it's not. And it's not the same kind of a tool. So I think I really love what Sarah was saying about cautious adoption, because I felt that we've actually been very cautious in a lot of ways, but that's been important, because whenever I'm talking to our staff about AI, I always talk about the negatives first before I talk about the positives. Because as soon as you start talking about the positives and you say what can be done with it, everyone gets so excited about that. They don't want to hear about the negatives. They don't want to hear about you shouldn't put lots of confidential data into it, and you need to question the output that comes out of it. And in terms of how we're engaging with that, with both staff and students, is coming back to this idea of really understanding what AI actually is, but also understanding how our staff and our students and our parents are currently viewing it. So again, it was really interesting to hear Sarah say about the surveys, because we've done some surveys recently as well, just to go, okay, well, where actually are we at with our sort of stakeholders and everything? And there's still a lack of knowledge among staff about what AI actually is and how it could be relevant to them. So it's those real key examples. And with students, what students are finding, and again, I'm echoing what Sarah said, is that what they find AI most useful for is like coaching and guidance. If there's something that they've not understood properly, maybe in a lesson, or something they want to learn more about, they're going to go to AI and ask them, because for them, it's a more elaborate version of Google. It has those answers. I said to someone the other day, the thing with AI, which makes it, I think, so appealing to our young people, is the AI never gets tired period 5 on a Friday afternoon. The AI never doesn't have time to answer your question because there's 29 other children in the class all asking different questions. The AI is always going to be there, and it's always going to adapt itself to sound like your best friend and to explain everything to you as you need it to. And in that way, you're not going to then challenge the information that is coming out of it. So for me, it's a rewind back to teaching staff and teaching students, which is what we're trying to do, what AI is, how it can be used safely, but also how you can challenge what comes out of it. And one of the things that we've done in school is very much link our teaching for students about AI to this idea of digital character and our school values, because the children understand what our school values are. And there's things like confidence and independence and resilience and that sort of thing. And they can talk about them in a normal school context, but we're trying to move them to a point where they can also talk about them in terms of using the online world and using AI. So confidence is the confidence to challenge something that AI gives you. You know, when you ask AI to generate for you a picture of a director of technology for learning, chances are you're going to get a picture of a man. And, you know, and it's probably not going to be a particularly ethnically diverse picture either. But again, using things like that. And again, Sarah was saying about this with the age group she works with. You can't teach children about AI without exposing them to AI, but you've got to be so conscious of the age range that you're working with. And obviously with the younger ones, how do you do that safely? So in terms of how we do it is to demonstrate AI and what AI does, but in a facilitated by an adult kind of a context, because then you can highlight some of the biases, you can highlight some of the inaccuracies, and you can actually make that an activity in itself in terms of, right, so we're asking the AI to do this for us. This is the output that we get. What's wrong with this? Where's the problem with this? What would you have done differently? Or even being deliberately provocative and ask the AI to sort of create something for you that you know is going to give, like, you know, one side of a debate or something that the students can then engage with and challenge. But for us, like I say, it's I'm not going to say we're not concerned about students using it to do their work for them, because of course that's always a concern. But it's really just trying to support students and support staff with the idea that you do need to question what AI tells you, because you need to understand how AI is built and what is driving the data set behind it and what it is producing for you and why. And I think, again, it goes back to this idea of teaching that prompt craft really carefully so that students and staff know how to challenge the outputs that they get from that. Because I've seen lots of people who will say, right, well, I went on to ChatGPT, I typed in a sentence, I didn't get back what I wanted. And it's like, it's not Google. You have to engage with it in a more sophisticated way. But again, that's around being able to train staff and students on that. And of course, the problem that schools have got, and the biggest challenge that schools have got, that's lovely if you've got someone who can do that. If you haven't got someone who can do that, and you don't even have, say, for example, a digital strategy in place, where on earth are you going to get this from? And how are you going to jump on that AI train that you can see just receding into the distance at the moment?
You know, not everybody is lucky enough to have somebody who does have an AI understanding to take them on that journey. So I think, you know, you're very wise to highlight that. I also think those examples that you're giving will be enormously useful to people who might be feeling uncertain about engaging. You're giving them some great guidelines about how to engage and to engage students in discussions about it. I also think this point about how the tools like the generative AI chatbots are always there to help you 24/7, never get tired, you know, like we do. And they're so eager to help, aren't they? And I think that is a real challenge. On the one hand, it's great for students to have, you know, a coach, an assistant who can be available whenever they need them. But on the other hand, they need to recognize the limitations of that coach and that it's not always going to give them accurate information or correct information. So it's a complex situation I think we're in. On the one hand, we've got tools that can be really, really useful, but on the other hand, they're also problematic. So it's a huge challenge. Thank you. That's going to be incredibly useful, I'm sure, for people listening to this podcast. Sarah, over to you now. How do you perceive this challenge that we're facing with respect to AI? Emma and I have talked a little about some of the challenges. What are the challenges that you're seeing, and some of the risks as well?
I think time is something that kind of overarches a lot of the challenges. First, with the training, getting people to have headspace to even think about it. From an infrastructure point of view, because that's part of my role as well, we feel that from a filtering, monitoring, we provide devices to students. It is a bit of a nightmare, and we find that we are constantly playing whack-a-mole with the big organizations who are pushing out this technology from a business point of view. And I sat very recently with Copilot developers who were telling me, oh, but you can get the Copilot now can summarize all your emails, it can do all these things. I was like, well, that's great if you're a busy professional person. You've built a product for professionals who have been through a whole school system where they've learnt those skills of being able to come over the challenge of a blank piece of paper. And you've created something that's not appropriate for young minds that are still developing their ability to learn and to understand what it means to come up with an original idea. And even though Copilot, chat, whatever it might be, could potentially help with that, is that the right thing to do? So I think ethically, that is a huge question, which I don't think is actually even on the agenda of the larger corporations, which, by the way, have admitted there is no regulation on this. And so it's down almost, I feel quite strongly about this, it's down to schools yet again to start mitigating what is a huge situation, a huge problem, and I'm not even sure where we begin with that. But what also struck me on an infrastructure side, we've had to make quite a few configuration changes to stop students even having access to Copilot because they just released a new bar on the Edge browser. And I was thinking, there are hundreds, if not thousands, hundreds of thousands of IT professionals working in education establishments for different age groups around the world, all clicking the different configuration changes, creating new scripts to stop this because they don't want it. Why are we doing this? Why does the source not change it? So that's the big challenge for us. And I've kind of come at it from a big point of view, but I think that the infrastructure teams in schools are under pressure. The Keeping Children Safe in Education changed last year with the filtering and monitoring. So that's very much the spotlight, and it puts the onus and responsibility very much on schools. And there is very little help and support for them on that side. So that's one aspect of it in terms of the infrastructure. But as I alluded to earlier in that point, I think the biggest challenge is to the learning process of students. And as a geographer, I'm a geography teacher, I have seen over the 20 years of my experience, the spatial intelligence that individuals have been outsourced to AI. And I know you've written and talked about this a lot, Rose, and hence why I'm very interested in all of that. And I just think we've got to be really careful what we offload to that, to any technology. And unfortunately, our Generation Alpha students just natively go, oh, look, there's a tool, I will use it, not with any sort of malice. Or we've got great students. And one of my colleagues just the other day said, I'd set them away on a 3-page reading task. I wanted them to read this article. And he watched on our classroom management software 3 students copy and paste it without even thinking into a bot of some description. And you can't block everything, so they're there. And he went, hang on a minute, what are you doing? And it was like, it wasn't even a second thought for some of them to think, oh, hang on a minute, why have I been set this task? So we've got a bit of education on the task setting and how we frame our learning experiences for sure. And that's what schools have always had to do, but also for the students to realize, like, oh, hang on a minute, why am I doing this? What am I getting out of this? So to go back to what I was saying before, I think we really need to focus on educating our students on how to learn and what learning is and what you've written extensively about, what human intelligence is about, because that's what we really need to be great at if we're going to get that balance right. Yeah, so that there are 2 big challenges which encompass lots of things probably.
Music to my ears, Sarah. But I agree, the consumerization of artificial intelligence is not doing education any favors, and it's not going to get better. And somehow we have to get more of a voice for educators to try and help so that we can kind of call these big developers to account and show exactly the kind of thing you're talking about, where, look, this doesn't work for us. It's not been designed for us and it doesn't work for us. And here's why. Also, that point about cognitive offloading is, as you know, a huge worry of mine. So I think they are 2 big risks. But something you mentioned earlier, and I want to move on to now, is around well-being. And you mentioned that keeping children safe in school and challenges around, filtering and monitoring. So what's your perspective on how we manage to get the well-being piece right? I have a huge worry that if we're not careful, we're going to see AI becoming something of the same ilk as social media. Social media has not done young people favors. And I worry that AI is going in the same direction. So how do we tackle that well-being piece?
Wow, that's a huge question, and I agree.
That is a huge question. I apologise. I don't expect you to answer it all.
No,
but
I do think about it. I have 2 teenage daughters myself, so I'm very much in that world. I mean, we've seen what social media and fake news and the impact of that, for example, on elections of the past. We've got modern history already to tell us what the impact will be. And it's now just supercharged with AI. And what really, I suppose, to sort of dig a bit deeper into the worries is that our children grow up unable to differentiate when they're using AI and when they're not using AI. It is automatically built into Snapchat. Apple announced last week it's going to be built into all of their products. We can now, from Microsoft, only get an AI keyboard now with a Copilot button put onto it. They're releasing their devices that have AI built in, and there is no regulation on that. So there's the access to the AI is something that maybe there is some control over, and then it's focusing on our kids, making sure they understand that that's just a tool that we can use to help us work more efficiently, perhaps a bit better. But actually, that's just work. Outside of work, there's a whole world out there of things that you should be doing that don't involve a screen. And we have, as I said, deployed devices to all of our students over the last 2 years, and some real concerns. And I'm equally on the back of those about screen time. And therefore, we've really been trying to create screen-free zones. We've tried to educate that, there are so many wonderful things you can get out of making something from scratch. Go back to basics. I run a knitting and crochet group every week to try and get away from this idea that gaming is something you should be doing as your main hobby. And I think that's where we, and similar to what Emma was talking about earlier in terms of skills, yes, there's digital skills that we need to embark, but I'm so keen on embarking like human skills of talking to each other, presenting to a group of people, being able to have an intelligent conversation with someone that you've never met before is an enormous skill. And if we're not careful, and actually, if we go back to the well-being, you get a huge amount from that. Going and making something from scratch, or meeting a group of people from an old people's home that you've gone to go and sing to, and then have a bit of tea and cake with afterwards, which are the experiences I had when I was at school, and have been invaluable. I remember them; they're happy memories, and that. Those are the sorts of things we need to promote in school alongside the education of AI. But I think access as well. We're grown-ups, we're the adults. We can say, no, we're not going to use that. You're not going to go on your computers at lunchtime or immediately after school. And I think that's where really involving parents in this is so essential, because unfortunately, with such busy households, technology, screens, I mean, it's not a new thing. It's only going to get worse if again, there's not a voice to be able to share some of these concerns.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. I think your point about there's no regulation is true. And as I said earlier, the really worrying thing is there's no regulation, and even the people building the technology don't really know everything about how it works, as we're seeing in multiple research papers coming out now. And that's a worrying situation, isn't it? That we have this technology out there for everybody to use. It's not regulated, and we don't really thoroughly understand how it works. I think it's interesting that we've ended up in this situation, and we need to make sure that we do something to ameliorate the situation as fast as we can, because there are tremendous benefits that these technologies can bring. So we want to try and get the good. I love the knitting and crochet. I think that's absolutely brilliant. And we need to do more of those things, not just sit and wouldn't the dream be that if we got the AI piece right, that's exactly what we could do, that we would be very efficient, effective, perhaps efficient's the wrong word, but we would use the technology optimally in order to make sure that we had more time to be away from it.
Yeah, no, that's my dream. Definitely.
It would be a great outcome, couldn't it? Emma, on the subject of well-being, you've heard what Sarah and I have been chatting about. Where do you stand on this? How do you help your students tackle difficulties here?
I think one of the things that we could all be better at actually is understanding our students' relationship with technology in general. Because I mean, I've got a 16-year-old son. I watched him obviously go through the pandemic and online learning. I saw that real shift change in him where an awful lot of his socialization moved online with his friends through gaming and this sort of thing. And how, although we're a few years down the line now from that, it hasn't shifted back in the same way. And I think sometimes as adults, we can be a little bit judgmental and we talk about screen time as opposed to screen usage, and really knowing and understanding what our young people are doing when they're online. And I also think as well, sometimes we're really bad at modeling it ourselves. So we tell our children they should have less screen time whilst we're sat there on our phones, checking our own social media accounts, and it's a kind of do as I say, not as I do sort of thing. But I think it absolutely goes back to what Sarah's saying about sort of, a healthy relationship with technology. And obviously what we try and do is to start to make it part of the conversation. So, when we were talking about things like safeguarding and things like deep fakes and that sort of thing, really thinking about, empowering students so that they feel able to, if they see something that they don't like or they're involved in something that makes them uncomfortable, that they know how to report that and to speak to staff about that. With regards to the staff, one of the things I've said on a number of occasions is we all take safeguarding as a whole school responsibility. If a child comes and tells you something, doesn't matter who you are, you're going to take the correct next steps off the back of that. And AI is no different. If a child comes and says something to you and says, "Oh, I've done this because AI told me to," you're not going to say, "Well, I can't listen to that and I'm not going to support you because I don't know anything about AI." So I think we need to shift our mindset into that sort of area as well, in terms of how AI fits into things. We've tried to incorporate it into things like our behaviour policies and have those conversations as well. Going forward, do we have something in our policies that actually reflects what happens when perhaps a child creates an inappropriate image with AI and puts it online? How is that different to them drawing a picture and putting that online, or taking a photo and putting that online? And again, it doesn't mean changing your policies completely, but actually just having those conversations with those key people in schools and just slotting those elements into your policy so that it's reflected in that. Giving the children some guidance as well about how they can and can't use AI. Because again, we say as adults, you've got a lot of teachers, and it's so interesting what you're saying about your survey, Rose, about, so many educators saying, I'm flailing around with this. There isn't the guidance out there. There isn't the support. I think the students feel the same in a lot of cases. It's like, so am I allowed to use AI? Am I not allowed to use AI? When can I use it? In what way? So again, I think we need to move towards developing those sorts of those policies and those processes in school, that guidance for our children, really, rather than just saying, the temptation is to always say block, ban, no one can use it. And of course, that's not going to be helpful at all. But what we're also trying to do as well is focus on developing this healthy relationship with technology. So yes, you may use technology to support you to do something, but then it links to a different outcome. So I mean, I mentioned earlier, we do things like the Apps for Good program, because what the children will do is they will work together in teams to create an app that solves a real world problem. We had lots of conversations this year about how AI could support that, or apps may be AI enabled. But the app they're creating is a climate change app. So what they need to do is get outside. What they need to do is understand what's happening in the environment about them. What they need to do is identify a problem in their local area that they can address. And what they need to do is put the technology down and go somewhere else and be present and be in that situation where they are talking to people. They need to be in that situation where, as students, when they've developed an idea, they then have the chance to present that idea to someone and to talk about it and to answer questions. And the idea itself has been created with technology and maybe with AI, but it leads to the development of so many other skills. And this idea of really trying to support students with knowing and understanding what being present in a situation actually means. Because, and again, I go back to how sometimes we're the world's worst. Might be sat at home watching a television program with the phone out as well. What are we giving our full attention to? And that actually we've got to be a bit more honest with ourselves about this, and then be really clear about what we're saying to our children. We want you to support you to do this, and modeling that for them and then guiding them through it. Because we're the adults, we should know better. They're the students, they're the ones who are looking to learn from us. And I'm not saying there's any easy answers out there, but I think that this idea about just unpicking a bit more how our young people use technology and why, as opposed to just saying, well, you shouldn't do this or you can't do that or you need to reduce it. We need to just be having more sophisticated conversations. And the starting point for that really is understanding how those students are using the technology in the first place. Because the element that worries me has always been, and one of the reasons why I started to sort of spend more time looking at AI and looking into AI was because the idea of the child that can't go home and talk to their parents and can't have a conversation in the family environment that goes to AI and doesn't understand what AI is or how it works, but what they have got is an incredibly sympathetic ear that will then give them advice and guidance on something that is troubling them outside of schoolwork or homework or anything like that. That's the bit that really concerns me. That's the area where I think we could, in terms of mental health in our young people, we could have some real challenges coming down the line, because when you've got that person that is always going to be much more sympathetic to you perhaps than at home, who are you going to end up talking to? Who are you going to end up spending more time in a space with? Well, the danger is it ends up being the AI.
Because it's there and it's there to listen and it will always respond. I agree. It's scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think some very wise words there. And I think you've also brought out something else very important, and that is the idea of human collaboration. So actually, the conversations around these things are supremely important because it's us working together to try and sort them out. Because I think there's a worry that these technologies can make us quite individualized or individualistic. What's the correct word there? Anyway, let's go for individualistic. We can become quite focused on us and our device, and we want to break people out of that and say, no, look, there's other people here. We need to work on this together. I think is a really important aspect that can easily get lost when it comes to technology. Brilliant. Thank you, Emma. I'm going to come back to you in just a moment for your top tip, but I'm going to go to Sarah first.
Well, I've kind of got 4 points I'm going to put into one, because you've asked for one top tip. So it's like 4 into one. So first of all, like we mentioned right at the beginning, find out what AI is. Read as much as you can. Find somebody in your organization who is interested. If it's not you, because you're not particularly tech-minded, ask. There will be somebody in a school body who does know something about it. Put together guidelines, find out what the risks are, and educate to engage staff and find out where your boundaries are. And that's to students as well, for both of those things. So these apply to both. And then move on to what's the best use of it. What have you heard? This is not a finite answer. It will keep changing. And I think that flexibility of approach needs to be aware. So do some trials, do some testing, find out it might not work, but that's fine. And it's really good to do that. And then lastly, try and break out into the outside world. I have an issue that schools can become silos, and if their reason for the being is to just get X number of students through X number of exams, they will put the blinkers on and not realize that stuff is going on out there. And I found that with technology anyway, that some schools, if they're not got anyone who's interested in the leadership team, they're still working like I trained it 20 odd years ago. Nothing really has changed, and you're not doing the students any good, and that's not great. So break out, find examples from the real world about how AI is being used at universities. How are they approaching it with their students? What about in the real world? What do employers want now? It's really important that they know that you're reacting to their needs, and perhaps how other jobs and employment areas are using technology such as AI in their world. So to make it real, because I think otherwise you're just in this silo of an echo chamber of whoever's got the loudest voice, and you might not get that voice heard. I've come from literally just being a classroom teacher, just a classroom teacher, I should say. It's not just a classroom teacher, it's a very important job. But 3 years ago, that was my main responsibility. But because I was loud and I had stompy feet, you can get places. And I think if you can empower anybody in an organization to do that, then it is hard. You've got to be interested, but it's not hard if you speak loud enough.
Great tips. Thank you, Sarah. Emma, back to you.
So my advice would be, firstly, don't be scared of it. Don't be scared of it. Don't be intimidated by it. It's very easy to see everything that's in the media, that's in the press, and think, oh my God, this is just too huge for me to get my head around. I don't have time. I've missed the boat with this. You haven't at all. It's an evolving situation all the time. And one of the things I often do is I just show staff how simple the ChatGPT interface page is, because people assume if they've never looked at it, it's going to be something incredibly complicated. And of course it's not. I would say be outward facing. It's sometimes when you're in a school or you're in a trust or you're in an organisation, there's so many other priorities on your time that it's very easy to go, I can't make space for this. But if you believe that it's something that's going to be important and you need to know more about, then find ways to be outward facing. And one of the things I would say is become something like a LinkedIn lurker or a Twitter lurker or something like that, where you, sorry, I know it's X now, I still call it Twitter, but where you actually go online. You don't need to be posting anything. You don't need to be trying to lead thought leadership, but actually just go. There are so many interesting people out there at the moment with different views, with different perspectives, with different experiences around AI, and just setting aside a little bit of time each week to update yourself in that way, you can actually take in quite a lot of information over a short space of time. And that will obviously then inform you in terms of, well, what do you want to do with AI? How is it going to be useful for you? Because I mean, a lot of staff say to me sometimes, well, yeah, I know it's important. I know I should be engaging with it, but I'm not sure how it's going to be relevant to me. So then my final thing would be, don't be afraid to try it out. Don't be afraid to sort of, when you're looking at some of these examples online, give something a go. Have a go at an example of someone who's done a ready-made prompt or whatever. See what you get. You can start by being cautious, but try it out. Because again, if you're working with young people, if you're working with learners, you know that they're doing the same thing. And actually, some of the best ways to learn is to test it out yourself, so you know that what works and what doesn't work. So you can see yourself some of the challenges that are in there. But that would be the thing, is to just don't be intimidated by it. Don't think it's too big of an issue to even start to engage with, and just kind of take those first steps, because they can be smaller steps to begin with.
Absolutely. Take those first steps. It is about eating the elephant one chunk at a time, as they say, isn't it? It can seem huge, and it is, but doesn't mean you can't get started and you haven't missed the boat. I think that's absolutely true. I agree. Learning about it is so important. And we've got loads of resources on our website, educateventures.com. You have, both of you, I'd say to listeners, go and have a look at Emma and Sarah's social media, LinkedIn. You will find things that are useful, and try and learn. I think that's super important, and try it. And you can really minimize the risks when you're trying out a chatbot by just not putting any personal information in it, making sure you don't put anything that can identify you or anyone else, and just very gently getting engaged. So brilliant. Thank you both for coming on the podcast. I know that this is going to be extremely useful to listeners, particularly those who haven't yet been able to engage with AI. But I actually think also for people who are starting to engage with AI, because you've given some great tips about approaching it as an institution, as well as an individual. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. If you want more information on the series and our wonderful guests, visit the EdTech Podcast website at theedtechpodcast.com and connect with us via social media. To see how Educate Ventures research uses AI ethically to make education and training better for schools, organizations, and individuals, go to educateventures.com or join the conversation on LinkedIn. There are abundant resources available that you can download, read, and get up to speed with what's happening with artificial intelligence. You've been listening to the EdTech Podcast, presented by myself, Professor Rose Luckin. Have a great week.